Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. I never thought I would find myself in a situation like this, something so unexpected, so complicated, that it still leaves me wondering if I should even share it with anyone. But stories like this can't stay buried forever, and maybe, just maybe, telling it might help someone else understand the strange, messy ways life and relationships unfold. It started on what I thought was a normal evening in our home, the kind of night when the world feels calm and predictable. Yet beneath that calmness, something was brewing that would change everything. The story centers around me, a woman in her mid-30s, navigating the everyday routines of life, and my stepson, a 22-year-old young man who had recently moved back into the house after finishing college. At first, everything seemed normal. Me trying to balance my responsibilities, him trying to find his place in the world again. But as the days passed, I began to notice something unusual, something that made me feel like the walls of our home were keeping a secret neither of us dared to say out loud. It began with glances, those fleeting, almost unnoticeable moments when I'd catch him looking at me just a little too long. At first, I brushed it off, convincing myself it was nothing. Maybe I was imagining things, maybe I was reading too much into a simple moment. But as time went on, those looks became harder to ignore. And then, one night, everything shifted. I had just returned from the shower, the soft hum of the bathroom fan still in my ears, when I sensed something. A presence. I turned, and that's when I realized I wasn't alone. My stepson was there, watching me quietly from the corner of the hallway, his expression unreadable. My heart pounded, not just from surprise, but from the unspoken weight of what that moment meant. What was he thinking? Why was he there? And most importantly, what was I supposed to do? That night sparked questions I had never prepared myself to answer. Was this just curiosity, a mistake of timing, or something deeper, something he couldn't put into words? And what about me? I should have been angry or at least unsettled. But if I'm being completely honest, there was something else. Something far more complicated, stirring inside me. As the days unfolded, our interactions became charged in ways I couldn't deny. The air between us felt different, heavier, more fragile, like we were both walking on a line we weren't sure we should cross. And yet, neither of us could step away. It was as though fate had thrown us into this situation to test the limits of trust, loyalty, and desire. The days after that night felt strangely different. On the surface, everything looked the same. We had breakfast in the kitchen, we exchanged casual words about work and errands, and we went about our routines. But beneath those ordinary conversations, something had shifted. It was like we were both carrying a secret, and every time our eyes met, the silence said more than our words ever could. I found myself watching him, too, watching the way he moved through the house, the way his voice carried when he laughed at something on his phone, even the way he paused before speaking to me, as though he was weighing every word carefully. I told myself it was just in my head, that I was imagining this tension. But then, little details began to add up. When I walked into the living room, he would sometimes go quiet mid-sentence on a call, his eyes flicking toward me like he didn't want me to know what he was thinking. When I cooked dinner, I would catch him glancing across the table, quickly looking away as if he'd been caught. And at night, I'd hear his footsteps in the hallway, slower, almost hesitant, as though he wanted to be near me without saying it out loud. Part of me felt guilty for noticing these things. After all, I wasn't supposed to think about him in any way beyond the role I had in his life. But another part of me, the part that longed for connection and warmth, couldn't ignore the spark that seemed to grow between us. I had been in my marriage for years, and while it had its steady moments, the passion that once filled the house had slowly faded. My husband often worked late, and sometimes, even when he was home, he felt distant, buried in his own world. It left me feeling unseen, unappreciated, like I was more of a shadow than a partner. And that loneliness, that's what made his glances so dangerous. I knew my stepson was going through his own struggles, too. Moving back home after college wasn't easy for him. He told me once that he felt lost, unsure of what path he wanted to take, uncertain about who he wanted to become. I could see it in his eyes. He was searching for something, for direction, for understanding. And somehow, in those quiet exchanges, it felt like he was searching for it in me. The strangest thing was how natural it all felt. We never spoke about what happened that night in the hallway. We didn't need to. The silence carried the weight of it, the unspoken tension filling the air whenever we were near each other. I found myself avoiding him sometimes, retreating to my room or busying myself with chores just so I wouldn't have to face that quiet storm building between us. But then, when he wasn't around, I would notice the emptiness of the house. His absence felt louder than his presence. It became a cycle, me pushing away, him gently closing the distance without even realizing it. And with each passing day, I felt the line between what was right and what was undeniable growing thinner and thinner. Have you ever felt torn between what your heart wants and what your mind warns you against? That's exactly where I found myself, trapped in a growing secret I wasn't sure I could keep, and unsure of what might happen if I stopped pretending it wasn't there. The night the silence finally broke was not planned. It was one of those moments that just happened, slipping past reason before either of us could stop it. I was sitting in the living room, the lamp casting a warm glow over the couch, reading through a book I had picked up weeks ago but never had the chance to finish. The house was quiet, my husband working late again, and I thought I had the night to myself. But then I heard the soft creak of footsteps on the stairs, and when I looked up, there he was. My stepson. He didn't say much at first, just asked if he could sit with me. I nodded, though my heart raced faster than I wanted to admit. He sat at the other end of the couch, but I could feel the weight of his presence like a pull I couldn't ignore. For a long time, neither of us spoke. We just sat there, the silence stretching between us, until he finally asked a question that cut through the quiet. "Do you ever feel lonely?" His voice was careful, almost fragile, like he wasn't sure if he should have said it. That question hung in the air, and I felt my breath catch. Because yes, I did feel lonely more often than I wanted to admit. I could have brushed it off, told him not to worry about me, but instead I simply said, sometimes. That one word seemed to open a door neither of us could close again. From that night on, our conversations grew deeper. What started as small talk turned into late-night discussions about dreams, regrets, and the quiet ache of feeling misunderstood. He told me about the pressure he felt after college, about the way he struggled to figure out his future, about how he sometimes wondered if he was failing before he even began. I listened, and in listening, I found pieces of myself reflected back at me. We were both searching me for something I had lost in my marriage, him for a direction he hadn't yet found. But the closeness brought risk. I became hyper-aware of every detail, how his eyes lingered on mine when he laughed, how his tone softened when he asked about my day, how the space between us seemed smaller every time we sat together. It was a conflict I carried inside me, the role I was supposed to uphold, and the feelings I wasn't supposed to have. I started asking myself questions late at night. Was I imagining it all? Was this simply a young man leaning on someone he trusted, or was there something deeper growing between us? Even my husband noticed changes, though not in the way you might think. He would comment on how well his son and I seemed to get along, how it's nice that you two are close. He had no idea of the tension running beneath the surface, the unspoken thoughts that neither of us dared to put into words. That irony alone made the situation heavier, like we were hiding in plain sight. Sometimes I wondered if the universe was testing me, giving me what I craved most, but in the most complicated form possible. It wasn't just about him watching me that one night anymore. It was about every choice afterward, every conversation, every lingering moment that blurred the line between what was safe and what was forbidden. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment the weight of the unspoken truth between us grew heavier. Every glance, every pause in our conversations, every shared silence seemed to carry something neither of us dared to admit out loud. The house, once just walls and rooms, now felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I tried to distract myself, throwing more energy into work, into chores, into anything that could pull my mind away, but no matter how much I resisted, the tension followed me like a shadow. It all built slowly, like a storm on the horizon. At first, it was harmless, an innocent laugh, a fleeting touch when handing over a glass of water, a moment of eye contact held just a second too long. But soon, The air around us became charged, and even the smallest interaction carried meaning. When we sat in the living room, the distance on the couch between us felt shorter every night. When we passed each other in the hallway, neither of us moved quickly, as though both were waiting for the other to say or do something that could change everything. The conflict inside me became unbearable. I knew the roles we were meant to play, the boundaries that should never be crossed. And yet, the loneliness I had buried for so long made his presence harder to resist. It wasn't just attraction, it was connection, the kind I hadn't felt in years. But that didn't make it easier. If anything, it made the temptation more dangerous, more impossible to ignore. One night, the tension finally came to a head. My husband had called to say he would be working late again, and I found myself sitting alone at the dining table, dinner growing cold. Minutes later, he walked in, my stepson, his eyes meeting mine with a look that told me he felt the same heaviness I did. He sat down across from me, and we ate in silence, though neither of us tasted a thing. It was as if the air itself was alive, pulsing with everything we hadn't said. After dinner, I started to clear the dishes, but he stopped me. His hand brushed against mine, lingering just a little too long, and in that moment, time seemed to freeze. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. There were no words, just the weight of that touch, the quiet acknowledgement of the line we were both standing on. It was the moment before the storm, the breath before the leap. And I knew whatever happened next would change everything forever. The air in the kitchen that night felt like it was about to snap, but before either of us could say or do anything, the sound of keys rattling at the front door broke the moment apart. My husband was home earlier than expected. I jumped back, pulling my hand away as though the touch had burned me, and hurried to finish clearing the plates. My stepson stepped back too, his face stiff, but his eyes still locked on mine for one last second before we both turned away. That moment should have ended things. It should have been the warning we needed, the reminder that we were playing with fire. But instead, it only deepened the tension. Because now, not only were we holding on to something unspoken, we were also carrying the fear of being discovered. Every sound in the house felt louder, every movement sharper, and the walls seemed to lean in closer, as if the house itself knew our secret. Then came the second twist I never saw coming. A few days later, my husband mentioned that he might have to travel for work, an out-of-town project that would keep him away for 2 full weeks. He spoke about it casually over breakfast, but when he said it, I felt the blood rush to my face. 2 weeks. 2 weeks of just me and my stepson under the same roof, with no one else around to break the silence or dilute the tension. I laughed it off, pretending it didn't matter, but inside I knew everything had just shifted again. Those days leading up to his departure were heavy with unspoken thoughts. My husband packed, made calls, and planned his trip, completely unaware of the storm brewing right in his own home. My stepson and I avoided each other more than usual, as though we were both trying to keep the distance, but the truth was, it only made things worse. The avoidance turned into longing, and the longing into a pull that felt impossible to resist. The night before my husband left, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the weeks ahead, the temptation that waited for us, and whether I had the strength to keep myself from stepping across that fragile line. When the morning came and he finally drove away, the silence that settled over the house was different this time. It wasn't just quiet, it was charged, alive, and full of possibilities neither of us dared to name. The first few days were a test. We danced around each other, exchanging polite words, keeping our conversations short. But then, slowly, the distance began to shrink again. One evening, I found him sitting outside on the porch, staring up at the night sky. I joined him, and for a while, we said nothing. The crickets filled the silence, and the cool breeze made the moment feel suspended in time. When he finally turned to me and whispered, "It feels different with just us here," I couldn't deny it. That was the second plot twist, my husband's absence. It wasn't just about being alone in the same house anymore. It was about being given the space to face what we had been trying to avoid. Every hour without him there raised the stakes higher, every glance carried more weight, and every night felt like we were standing closer to a decision we couldn't undo. The days without my husband grew heavier with each sunrise, until one night the storm finally broke. I had been in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner when my stepson walked in, his expression unreadable, his silence louder than words. For a moment we just stood there, the space between us shrinking until the unspoken truth became impossible to ignore. My heart pounded, torn between fear and something deeper, and I knew this was the point of no return. He spoke first. "I can't keep pretending anymore," he said softly, his voice trembling but steady enough to make my chest tighten. "I don't know what this is, but I can't keep acting like I don't feel it." His honesty hit me like a wave. I had been fighting the same battle inside, telling myself to hold back, to stay in control, but hearing him say it out loud made everything real. For a long moment, I couldn't answer. My mind screamed about boundaries, about roles, about all the reasons this could never happen. But my heart, lonely, aching, desperate for connection, was louder. "You're not the only one," I whispered, and in that instant, the line we had both been avoiding finally shattered. The days that followed were filled with a closeness we had both denied for too long. We laughed more easily, spoke more freely, and shared moments that felt like stolen fragments of a life that could never fully belong to us. It was a dangerous happiness, but happiness all the same. For the first time in years, I felt alive, seen, and wanted. And yet, beneath it all, the fear of what would happen when my husband returned never left me. And then the unexpected twist arrived. A week before my husband was due back, I received a call that changed everything. He wasn't coming home as planned, his project had been delayed, and he would be gone even longer. Relief should have been my first reaction, but instead, I felt a sharp pang of dread. Because with more time came more risk, and deep down, I knew secrets like this could not stay hidden forever. The climax of it all wasn't just the choice we made, it was realizing that every choice had consequences waiting on the other side. We had crossed the line, and now we were living in a fragile balance between passion and exposure, between what we wanted and what the world could never accept. When the days stretched on without my husband's return, I realized something important. No matter how much I wanted to hold on to the secret connection between me and my stepson, it couldn't last forever. Every moment we shared felt like it belonged in a different world, one where there were no boundaries, no rules, no consequences. But we didn't live in that world. We lived in one where choices had weight, and sooner or later, the truth would come crashing down. We spent those final days in a quiet balance. We still laughed, still shared conversations late into the night, still carried the unspoken bond that had grown stronger with each passing hour. But there was also a heaviness, a realization that what we had could not be permanent. And the closer the day came for my husband's return, the more the silence between us was filled with the questions we were both afraid to ask. The night before my husband came back, we finally faced it. Sitting together in the living room, my stepson looked at me with a mixture of longing and sadness. "We can't keep this," he said softly. "We'll ruin everything." His words cut deep, because I knew he was right. What we shared was real, but it wasn't built to survive in the life we had to return to. Tears stung my eyes as I nodded, unable to say more. Sometimes love, or whatever it is that pulls two people together, exists only in the spaces in between, in stolen moments that can never be carried forward. When my husband returned the next morning, the house felt different. The tension that had once filled the rooms was gone, replaced by a silence that spoke of endings. My stepson and I never mentioned what happened again. Slowly, life settled back into its routine. My husband returned to his work, and my stepson started making plans to move out and begin his own life. The distance that grew between us was painful, but it was necessary. Looking back now, I understand what that chapter meant. It wasn't just about desire, or loneliness, or even betrayal. It was about the reminder that connection can appear in unexpected places, that sometimes the heart craves what it shouldn't, and that choices define who we are more than feelings ever can. It left me with questions I still carry about love, loyalty, and the lines we draw for ourselves. So I'll leave you with this. What would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have let the connection grow, or would you have cut it off sooner? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you see it. And if you'd like me to tell a sequel, where the story continues from this ending, let me know too. Summary. This is the true story of a woman who found herself entangled in an unexpected bond with her adult stepson. What began as stolen glances and quiet tension soon became something deeper, challenging boundaries, relationships, and loyalty. In the end, choices had to be made, and the story reminds us of the complexity of love, the cost of desire, and the importance of decisions that shape our lives.